Hello. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us at Marijuana Monthlies. My name is Chelsea Higgs-Wise, and I am the co-founder and executive director of Marijuana Justice. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are really excited to bring on into our space and center humanity and really believe, again, that cops, prosecutors, and judges will always use this quote unquote justice system with more aggression and bias towards Black and Brown people and residents right here. And this is a common reality right here in the Commonwealth and in our country. We're seeing this across the state, across the globe. And today we're really excited to bring on our coalition members that fight for justice with us. And so I'm going to jump right on in and introduce our panelists. And you all have seen them, you've heard them. If you've been following along to our platform for a long time, these are no strangers, but because they do such great work, I am going to take the time to just read a little bit about them before we bring them to the stage. So again, I'm about to bring forth the Marijuana Justice our team, our Canna Justice Coalition. So tonight we have our esteemed panelists from the coalition who are here to discuss their perspectives on General Assembly session and how legislation could have impacted Virginians across the Commonwealth and what they did and what they're going to continue to work on in the future. First off, in our coalition, we have Khalia Harris. Khalia's pronouns are she and her. Khalia was born and raised in the Richmond area. She currently works as the executive director of Virginia Student Power Network, supporting student organizing throughout Virginia, and as we've seen even throughout the country this past week. Khalia is also a co-host of the award-winning podcast and radio show Race Capital, which examines racial narratives in the fallen capital of the Confederacy. She's currently involved in various community organizing and survival efforts, including co-coordinating the mini grants program of the Richmond Mutual Aid Disaster Relief, or also well known as MAD RVA. So we'd love to welcome Khalia Harris. Thanks so much, Khalia. All right, our second panelist that we have on today is Valerie Slater with Rise for Youth. Valerie Slater's pronouns are she, her, and hers, and she is a juvenile justice attorney and executive director of Rise for Youth. This organization is advocating for the rights of youth and families facing justice system involvement or engagement of other systems charged with the care of Virginia's youth. Valerie earned her Juris Doctorate from the University of Richmond School of Law and her bachelor's from Colorado State University. Valerie is a fierce advocate for children and brings to her work an unwavering commitment to strengthening youth and communities to lead the efforts to realize their visions for change. Please welcome Valerie Slater. If you have not heard this woman speak yet, you are in for such a treat.
My camera's giving me challenges, but I'm going to work it out.
Okay. All right. We are here, but Valerie's voice is in the room. And last but definitely not least, we have Ashley Shapiro. Ashley's pronouns are she, her, and hers, and she is the legislative director for Justice Forward Virginia. Ashley Shapiro currently serves as a deputy public defender for the Office of Public Defenders in Richmond, Virginia, and previously served as a public defender in Fairfax, Maryland, and as well as here in Virginia. During her time as a public defender, she's continuing to advocate for thousands of clients against the criminal carceral system. And she's a graduate of San Diego State University and George Washington University Law School. Please welcome Ashley Shapiro. Hey, Ashley. All right. Well, we are definitely going to continue to work on Valerie's screen because we would love to make sure we have them on there. But Valerie, we still have you with you. Still have you with us? Okay.
Yes, I am here. I am here. I'm just looking at all of the different ways that I might, troubleshoot this. So,
Gotcha. Okay, well, we're going to come back to you. And why don't I go ahead and chat with you, Khalia. Khalia, thanks so much for being here. Khalia, you're the executive director of the Student Power Network. So just kind of first question, how are you feeling after this past session? How are you doing?
Well, the session is not over. So the one thing is that we kind of felt like we were done. We put out our wrap-up posts, felt like it was pretty much over. But the reality is that there's a special session now, and all of the important things that have to do with money and dollar signs is what's being negotiated. And so it kind of feels like we're in limbo. Still exhausted from the long session that we just went through, but gearing up in case there's more advocacy for us to do, and waiting for the governor to sign the legislation that did pass.
You mentioned that session is not over. So really quickly, would you mind just sharing with the audience a little bit about, wait, the session is not over? What's happening now?
Yeah, so it's like a record scratch moment. What? Basically what happened was they had their regular session. That's where we were all kind of celebrating. It's all over. The legislators left Richmond. And what they didn't do during that session was the House and the Senate did not agree. Their budgets didn't agree with one another. And so they weren't able to come to a consensus and pass a budget that's through that session. So when they do that, they have to have another time to complete the work. They can't just leave it undone. And so that's where this quote unquote special session comes into play. And then there's also the Reconvene session as well that's coming up. And that's where, there's dozens of bills that have financial implications, budget implications that are still up in the air. There's vetoes that the governor can hand down. There's a lot of things still up in the air. So when we say session is not done, that means our eyes are still on the process and we are ready to hold people's feet to the fire to make sure that things get passed or that these bad bills, like funding the police, doesn't happen.
That's right. So the special session is really coming back to do that budget. This is what we called a long session. Valerie Slater, look at that. Troubleshooting, you fixed it. Welcome back. We were really just talking about how this week we started this special session for the budget. And this year, every other year is a long session versus a short session. And the long session is what Khalia just described, meaning that we normally try and do everything, including the budget, within that regular session. And that's usually 15 days longer, 45 days versus the 30 days. So every other year is a long session versus short. And this was a long time, the long session. And they're making it even longer because they could not come to that agreement. So we are still waiting. And I want to throw this out, and Khalia spoke a little bit about this, but I would love to hear from the panel. Why is the budget so important to what we are doing, even if it's not necessarily the impact, the fiscal impact to our bill? So number one, let us know why it's important. And someone also can just briefly tell the audience what that fiscal impact term means that I just mentioned. Who wants to take a stab at that?
I'll start by talking about what fiscal impact is. So when you talk about fiscal impact, you're talking about how is the state's money going to either work for or work against what it is that you're attempting to do. And you're also talking about whether or not the General Assembly is going to be willing to invest the dollars that it takes in order for a bill to truly be as effective, for it to have the reach, for it to have the impact that we need for it to have. So you're talking about, when we talk about education and we talking about fully realizing the standards of quality, it doesn't matter if they say, yeah, we're going to go ahead and enact all of those standards of quality if they're unwilling to put the money behind it so that they're actually able to do the work. Right. So you can have all of the laws that you want and that say all of the great things that you want. But if there is a price tag associated and the budget does not allocate the money, then it may as well not be a law at all, because then it just sits on a shelf somewhere. Everyone's able, or legislators are able to pat themselves on the back and say they passed great bills, but they did, unfortunately, what can often happen is they failed to fund it. So that way, we have done what we said we would do, but we have not held ourselves accountable to the dollars in order for the laws to do what they should. So that I'll take that piece and stop talking so someone else can.
I think the other part of the fiscal impact is that it's not always accurate, and it's usually used as a way to kill bills. So whenever there's a bill that could possibly have a fiscal impact, they only ever include what the possible costs are, not the possible savings. So when you look at something like defelonization of drugs, that would obviously be a massive cost savings to the Commonwealth in terms of decarceration, probation costs, supervision costs, investigation, policing would be a huge savings to the Commonwealth. And yet that's not included. They only include estimates of what money could cost. Often it's contested as to whether or not that's accurate, and it's usually used as a way to kill a bill. The fastest way to get a bill killed is to slap on a fiscal impact statement, send it to either the Appropriations or the Finance Committee, and it dies pretty much on impact.
Yeah. You know what? I'm glad you said that, because I want to add one other piece now that you did. The other thing is, where will they put the money, right? Because they can pass a bill, but then give the wrong agency the money to actually to move the bill forward, or to move the law forward, right? So case in point, right now we're talking about the violence prevention work. And the argument is, who should have the dollars? Should it be the Department of Criminal Justice Services, or should it be our new Attorney General? I'm sorry. Yeah, I laughed. But
those are some options there. Those are some real options to have.
Right. So do we have an agency that has been doing this all along and has already been working in community and has already been granting communities money? And is that where we would want this money to be allocated from, or an attorney general who has already begun to attempt to overreach and who has very blatantly demonstrated a desire to fund police, to put more and more money into policing? And I am not here to say, oh, you know what? I'm not going to say that I'm not here to say it. What I'm going to say is this. I'm going to say that we already have a very generous a police budget, right? Law enforcement budget. It's very, very generous. What we don't have is community programming that is funded effectively. What we have instead is all of these shortfalls and all of these underfunded communities. And yet and still, we keep throwing more and more money at the police. And so I would much rather see the funds in an administration that is willing to allow communities to take the reins, at least to have the money to be able to take the reins and do the work of healing from within.
Wow. Okay. Well, I want to, anybody else want to speak on the budget piece, particularly the impact or anything before we move on? I think that was a great.
Just to add to what Val is saying, and I'll be brief with it. The GA, as we know, has a history since, before the uprisings, but even since the uprisings in 2020, where they had a special session on policing and gave the police raises, bonuses, just cash money, right? And lots of it was our COVID money. They're also trying to give, I think it's like $100 million of state funds in this budget. So it's a continuous thing that's happening on the state level, and it's encouraging the local folks to also give more money. So just keep an eye on that money to the police.
And then taking it away from things like SNAP benefits that could actually help people. It's a big item on the chopping block right now.
Well, and that seems a great segue for me to mention my social work background. And a big reason why I am here today and transferring from here is after working directly with so many residents that are receiving SNAP, TANF, many different services that have put money directly into their pockets and able to feed their families. I saw those programs slowly getting chopped away to where even as a social worker professional, I could not find them anymore. And so that is really what got me followed here. I followed the money, and this is where I found the money, y'all. So if you ever wonder why social workers end up here, here's a good guess. So we're really here to talk about what happened in the regular session as we were continuing to look at the budget, because again, we have to defend what's going on with our resources, whether they're directly talking about our issues or not, because that could be indirectly defunding our issues. But I want to bring up something a little bit lighter about the victories. In general session, and particularly when we just had this very dramatic shift in leadership and values, it can be tough to find victories. But I would love to hear from the coalition, what are some victories that you all had this session?
I do not mind talking about that. So, one of the things that Rise for Youth has been working very diligently on is shifting the narrative and shifting the focus when it comes to juvenile justice. We have got to take a public health lens as we look at young folks that find themselves in trouble, because when we look foundationally at what's going wrong, it's communities that are underfunded. It's families that are struggling. It's young folks having to fend for themselves and frankly, not knowing how. And they shouldn't be thrust into that position to begin with. And so we moved forward a bill this session, HB 1197. That bill is to convene a work group to study moving the Department of Juvenile Justice from the Public Safety and Homeland Security Secretary into the Public Health and Human Resources Secretary, and it passed. Can I say that again? It passed. We are so excited about that. It's one of those 30-day bills, and so it isn't until next week, Wednesday, technically, that it will become law if the governor does not sign it before. But how exciting is that? That we are able to begin this conversation. So that is our biggest win. It's a shift that we have been talking about and moving towards for the last 4 years. And here we are now on the cusp of really making some needed change. So really, really excited about that. And you can stay tuned, because we're going to be tapping everyone that is community, that is doing the work, to add your voice when we are ready to really get rocking and rolling on it.
That's right. That's a really big shift in values and who shows up to care for our youth. And that's really a big part of what the Canada Justice Coalition is here to do, is what is the response? What don't we need to respond to anymore? And how we can really come together to build our base. I want to kind of go next, actually, for a victory. As for the marijuana justice lens, everyone's been asking about marijuana and what happened this session and that sort of thing. And our victory, y'all, I really want to say that we had two. Number one, the community and the amount of people that we were able to really mobilize and have their voice out, and the people that were able to use the jargon that this session versus the last couple of years, that really was a victory to us. People were saying the word oligopolies. People came even before session, said no new crimes, right? I mean, it was really a narrative shift of, we know what to look for. It's not just about legalizing it any old kind of way. And it really was, well, what's going on with us in a car? What's going on here? What's going on with our youth? Like our victory was hearing from the community what they wanted out of marijuana, and really being able to step up and say, and use the language that legislators a lot of times try and say, well, intimidate us and say, hey, you don't have all the answers. Hey, you haven't read the bill. Hey, all the things that really doubt us. And what I and many of us saw was that that did not stop us this year. And to go out and to say no, vote no on a legalization bill, that can take some bravery if you don't know what's really in those words. And because people have been paying attention, people have asking questions, and people know what's right and what's wrong. We were really able to come out very confidently and say, there is no proposal out there that defines legalize it right. There was not one proposal that was going to reunite our families the way that we really wanted it to. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But definitely not in a way that would start adult use sales. This year, we never even brought up the repealing and decriminalizing of youth. That did not happen last year. And we had to fight really hard just to keep what we were able to get a little bit of progress. And I'm really excited to hear from the coalition about what that looks like. But that is our victory, number one, that the community spoke up, the community was confident, and that got to save my voice a lot and our coalition's voice a lot. And number two, that we really did stop further harm from happening in a really exploitative cannabis capitalism industry that's happening across this nation and across the globe, to be very honest. So that's our victories right here from Marijuana Justice.
Hey, Chelsea, we have a question in the chat asking to summarize where we are with legalization and what are people allowed to do with reference to possession? If you could just briefly go through that.
Great. Thank you so much, Teresa, for that question. And thanks for Ashley for passing that on. The first thing I really want everyone to know is that what we all downloaded and got in our heads July 1 of 2021, it's exactly the same. Nothing has changed. So as of right now, in Virginia, you can possess up to 1 ounce on your person if you are 21 and up. And that has been the law since July 1st. I'm going to also say that it is not legal to consume in public. It is legal to consume in private. If you have looked over your lease, if you have looked over any paperwork of where you live in your shelter, I want to be really clear that there are many homes and places and landlords that are not allowing consumption of marijuana. So please be careful of that. On school property, it's still zero tolerance school property right there on campus, as well as K through 12. Also for folks with mixed immigration status, it is not legal to possess in that space because it's still illegal to possess marijuana on the federal level. There is legal to grow up to 4 plants in a house. You do have to have it properly labeled, out of reach of youth and out of public view. And so we will also really be putting out more information. We're hoping to get more Know Your Rights information coming out on our year-round July 1. And just know that what we lived through since July 1 of 2021 is where we are. I know I talked a little bit about public housing where you can consume, also where home cultivation is. I want to be really, really specific, even because right now in Richmond, we're having this intersectional conversation about housing, is that in public housing, which is also being demolished right now, it is completely illegal to have cannabis. And I just really want to say, y'all, that is the most affordable place to live. And that is not a place where it is accessible to have cannabis. And that has been a conversation across the board, and where poverty, where race, where just completely disenfranchisement comes into place. So that's a pretty long answer, but that hopefully that gives people a little bit about possession. I do also want to pass it over to Ashley to talk a little bit about possession in the car. And just to also mention that, Teresa, thank you so much for popping that question. And if anything passed that was positive or negative, right now, again, it is mostly the same. There is some Delta 8 conversations out there that I'd like to have a little bit more offline about, but basically they've really limited the Delta 8 accessibility out there. Also, there were some opportunities that we were really hoping for that maybe would have reduced some of the penalties for home cultivation. But overall, the bill brought on more possession crimes, more felonies, and just more harm. And so that overall was why we said no to the bill. But if anyone ever has more questions, feel free to hit us up at info@marijuanajustice.org. And Ashley, if you wouldn't mind just kind of going over really quickly about cannabis and the vehicle as well.
Absolutely. So in terms of use of cannabis, it would still be under the driving while under the influence statutes. Someone could still be arrested if they were found to be under the influence of marijuana. Practically speaking, proving that would be very difficult. Unlike with alcohol, where there's certain blood alcohol levels that can be measured scientifically, there are no levels for marijuana that can be scientifically determined to have impacted someone's driving. So that at least has not changed. They did not add anything into the statute that would have made it that way, but it is still illegal to drive under any influence of any substances. With regard to having it in the car, it's similar to having an open container of alcohol now. So it's a class 4 misdemeanor to use marijuana while in a moving car. So it's sort of a few steps in there. Practically speaking, I honestly haven't seen this charged very much, which is a good thing. I'm sure police are using it still as a reason to try to infringe on people's rights and get into people's cars. But it is being treated largely just like having an open container of alcohol.
And when people say, well, how do I transport weed in my car? What does the law say about the vehicle piece?
I think it has to be in a closed container. That is my understanding.
Yes.
And the original at that. It can't be
in
yours.
the originally sealed package, but.
Yep. And put it in your trunk. Make sure it's not an arm's length of you or your passenger. These are some things that, they might bring up. And if these are just really important things to know, so that if you are ever stopped, you can talk about your rights as well as continue to defend yourself, because there has been an increase in these DUIs in quote unquote legal states. And what we've seen is a lot of the times, again, these carceral actors, the cops, using these different charges, again, to target certain folks. So we want to make sure that we are protecting ourselves.
I would just add that they cannot, even though those are still crimes you're not allowed to use it while driving, they still cannot search your car for it. If you are actively smoking marijuana when the police pull you over, they still cannot search your car. They can write you the ticket for that, but that's it. That law was changed prior to legalization, and that still stands.
And that was part of and just speaking a little bit about that, because it really brings up the pretextual work that you all did. So Ashley, why don't we go right to you and talk about your all's work this past session and those pretextual stops, and a little bit maybe more about how marijuana fit into that.
So most of our victories, I would say this term, were killing things. Basically, the legislature, the Republican legislature and legislators came after every single reform that's been passed in the last 2 years. Almost every single one, there was a bill to repeal it. The major victories, I'd say, would be killing the pretextual reform and probation reform, which we got passed. Pretextual reform was passed and is a huge victory. And it's actually something Virginia was the first on, and now other jurisdictions, other states are actually looking to do. And what we did is, as a bunch of public defenders, we looked at all of the reasons that police were using to pull people over. The United States Supreme Court had previously said, even if the police officer has nefarious reasons, i.e. racist reasons for pulling someone over, that's perfectly fine as long as they can point to some infraction as a reason. Not signaling, not stopping to a full stop at a stop sign, things of that nature. As long as there was something, so the police can just follow you until you make some minuscule of the literally thousands of infractions that Virginia has, they're allowed to pull you over. Statistically speaking, people of color are twice as likely to be pulled over and 3 times as likely to be searched during that stop with the police. So this is being used and has been used in a completely disparate way. So in the last session, we were able to get a bill passed that banned stopping people for basically about 10 of the most egregious uses. These are things like dangling object, which a normal person would think that it's something that's completely obstructing your windshield to your view. It's supposed to be a safety thing. It's not. The courts have held even an air freshener, college tassels, anything hanging from your rearview mirror followed under that. You can guess that a white college student having their tassels is not pulled over, where a person of color with rosary beads is pulled over. And that was perfectly legal. When you look at things like broken taillight, even though the other taillight's completely working, third brake light, which most people don't even know that their car has, and excessive tint, registration, things of this nature, that some of them are based on poverty. People don't have the money to fix those things in their cars, or it's just the excuses that police use to pull over largely people of color. And so a couple sessions ago, the legislature passed a bill that is the law that you cannot pull someone over for a list of those pretextual reasons. And if someone is pulled over, then they can't use anything from the search. So it's unlawful to do it. And then as there has to actually be a penalty or it would still continue. Nothing can be used in court based on what is found. In with that was also the banning of search for the odor of marijuana. The odor of marijuana was by far the biggest reason for searching a car. I can't tell you how many cases I've had where it was the odor of marijuana when there was none found in the car, because it's just an excuse and it's impossible to prove or disprove if the officer smelled it. If the person probably didn't even, but let's just say they had smoked earlier in the day, they get in the car and it was a free pass for the police to just ransack their car. And, we only see the cases where the police find something. There are plenty of other cases where they just ransack someone's car on the side of the road and leave them there to pick up the damage because they found nothing. And so with that bill, it was also banned for searches just for odor of marijuana, which has significantly decreased the amount of car searches, particularly disparate impact, racially based searches of cars.
And Ashley, you're mentioning searches of cars and rampaging cars. Now with these search, are they also able to search the people as well, like on their person?
Yes.
And the stories and the conversations we also often hear with these searches are the very aggressive types of physical searches that are going on, the very inappropriate, even molestation, abuse that are going on within these searches. So I just wanted to also bring up to the point of that stopping this search isn't just from stopping the search in the car. It's also could be very much stopping an assault on people's bodies and stopping the lack of boundaries that the cops really have once they feel like they have a legal reason to put that type of authority on folks.
If people don't immediately submit to the police's aggressive authority, the police will pull them out of the car, throw them on the ground, handcuff them just so they can search their car. I mean, watching body cam as much as I do, it's even more egregious than people think how much people's personal bodily autonomy is violated on a regular basis. And because if I have the case, that means there was some sort of alleged criminal activity that never comes to light, is how the person was treated. I have had cases where I remember one, it was in the middle of winter and it was a grandfather and his grandson. And this officer was just dead set certain there was something in the car. She pulled out the gentleman and his grandson, middle of January, made them wait outside the car for 40 minutes while she ransacked the car. The only thing she found was an old empty alcohol container. And then they prosecuted it. They went to court to prosecute this, which is why I had the case.
Right.
We beat the case, but I mean, to see that poor child and to see the grandfather on the side of the street, these are the kind of things that the citizenry don't realize how much of an abuse of power and how much power the police have. So pretextual reform, prohibiting the search for marijuana, significantly limits the police's ability to even have those initial interactions.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And that is why repeal is just our main push right now as we are legalizing, quote unquote, is because of this really atrocious drug war that has been put in place, that has been put in power to have those types of experiences for so many people. And unfortunately, as Ashley is saying, that folks like us that are not experiencing this really are not internalizing nor understanding how often this is happening. And many people are also not understanding how much money the cops are getting for this to continue to happen. Does anybody else want to say anything about that piece?
I would just say that I think a lot of Black people, brown people, undocumented folks, Indigenous people, we know, right? We know it because it's our communities and our experiences. So to be able to have folks in the legislature that are speaking truth to this, that are bringing impacted folks into that process, I think is so important, especially when we're reducing the incidences where people are coming into contact with police that we know are violent, like extensions of the state.
Exactly. And that's what really the repeal is for, is to shrink the power of this carceral institution. And that's what we're here for in this legalization process, is to shrink the power of the system and increase the power of the people. Khalia, I would love to, well, before I shift off, Ashley, is there anything else you all wanted to say about your General Assembly experience this past session? Any other victories?
Again, it's just killing a lot of the bad stuff. Keeping pretextual reform was a big deal. they came after. There was huge probation reform, something like almost half people that are serving time are on probation violations for things as minimal as testing positive on. I have so many probation violations right now that are driving me insane because the offense for which they were convicted was 15 years ago, and the only violations are testing positive. And they're still on probation. They're still being supervised. They're still going to prison for these kind of violations. And so the major reform that happened last session, they came at it and they came at it hard. And thankfully we were able to keep the Senate and not have that pass and undo all of the amazing work that was done in just the previous session. So that's definitely a huge victory. And I think, just quickly speaking about second look, the fact that it got passed in the Senate on a pretty bipartisan way, it obviously got killed in the House. But to make those moves to get people to really start seeing the humanity of people and not just look at their numbers, not just look at what they did 15, 25 years ago, and recognize that people deserve a second chance. People deserve to have their cases heard again. It didn't pass, but the fact that it made it through the Senate with bipartisan support was definitely a victory and something that we can keep working towards.
You mentioned it a little bit, but just quickly, maybe a couple sentences. What is second look, Ashley? So
second look it's described as similar to parole, but it's not exactly. It's basically for people who are serving extended sentences. In this case, it was 15 or 25 years. And that it allows them to come back to the court in which they were originally sentenced, allows the court to look at what they've done during their time in prison. And the only people that are eligible are people that had spotless records during their time, so that they are not a danger. They've never had a disciplinary infraction. Usually it's going to be people who have used, the limited resources that are available to get education, to get drug treatment, to get a paralegal certificate, things of that nature, help their fellow inmates, gotten into the cooking program, something like that, to have them take a second look at their sentence and see, is this really serving societal goals? The bill had a provision to allow any victims of the crime to come and speak their piece as well. So really brought everyone to the table and just allowed someone a second chance, not 10 minutes after they were sentenced, but decades, to really see, is this the best use of our funds, really, to have people incarcerated and in cages for the rest of their life? Or is this someone who can be a productive member to society, and we should take another look?
That's right. So just another way to get our people out and decarcerate. And that's really what we're here for, to find ways to free them all. Khalia, over to Virginia Student Power Network. Tell us a little bit about your GA experience and some wins that y'all had.
Similar to Ashley and Justice Forward, we had our swords out this session, whatever weapons you just pick. I'm a little bit nonviolent on that end, so I probably had my hands. And they were ready to eat for any legislator that was putting out bad legislation. We also had support for some good education bills that were put out, like the HB 582 that actually passed through and hopefully will be signed by the governor. It provides information, or it requires institutions of higher education to provide information about SNAP benefits to their students. We know that is necessary, especially as school prices are going up, and so is the cost of food and living. Some of the bills that we supported that were good didn't make it through. As a matter of fact, especially in the House, they were really killing stuff. It was sad to see. But some of the good education stuff that didn't make it through was like the higher education bill that would have prohibited institutions from withholding degrees and transcripts from folks just because they owe a debt. That bill was killed in the House. It made it like this. There was two on each side. And the one that made it over, crossed over to the House, got killed by the House. The one that started on the House side didn't make it to the Senate. So hopefully that can come back next session because it's necessary. And we spent some time with our partners at the Legal Aid Justice Center trying to fight back the SRO legislation, so the school resource officers. The Republicans had this whole mission in mind to try to arm each school, elementary school and middle school, with an SRO. And then they also had legislation to make it so that certain school security officers who had been a part of the armed forces for 10 years or more, that they'd be able to have guns in schools. So yeah, just wrap your mind around that, because what? That one didn't pass, thankfully. But the SRO bill that would have given one SRO for each elementary and middle school, it got heavily amended to the point where they pretty much gutted the bill. But it is awaiting the governor's signature. What it basically says in the end is that there will have to be one officer from each department that doesn't have an SRO that goes to a training annually. So we will not be arming the schools with SROs this year, but they are still trying to put money into the SRO fund on the budget end. And Chelsea, I would just echo what you were saying about SB 391 with the marijuana bill. That was probably the biggest lift of this session, because not only was it like super multifaceted, because they tried to put everything in one. So if you're a layperson or a young person that's trying to follow this, it was really hard to understand like what was good, what was bad, but is it all bad? You know, so there was lots of questions throughout each piece. So there's that. And then there's the fact that we have to ask the question of, well, are they passing new crimes at the end of the day? Right. And so once we answered that question and it was yes, we said it's time to go ahead and kill it. And so when we killed it, that's a victory, because in the end, we're not stepping away with new crimes. And that means that that's less of our people that are going to be interacting with the police, and probably less work for Ashley. So really happy about that. And aside from the actual legislation, I want to say that our biggest win was we had an awesome lobby training. We were able to translate what was happening in the legislature to our base and let folks know what was going on. And I think that's a really big deal for young people, because LIS, the website where all this is happening, it is truly like another language. And so being able to let folks know what these acronyms mean, what the legislators are talking about, that was probably our biggest victory out of all of it.
Whew, yes, it was quite a lift, and I don't want to minimize anyone's work. It is so much work to kill things, y'all. It is sometimes that is the most important thing that we can do. So our victories, it might sound like a negative thing, but it's actually just harm reduction and safety, and that's what we're really here for. We keep us safe. You know, Khalia, I really appreciate what you mentioned about just this translation of what's going on. Again, because knowing and understanding what's happening in the political landscape of Virginia, we might be here in this defensive posture for a few years. And so the stronger and louder that our base can be with exactly what they want, what they have a problem with, and speaking exactly what they really require in the language, then that will create the power that the legislators cannot deny. And that's when a lot of the narrative power comes in. And I think all of us, even though we're killing things, and we haven't mentioned this specifically, but the ability to quote unquote kill a bill means that our narrative worked. It means that the talking points hit. It means that somebody was out there agreeing with what we were saying. The intent of this bill is not good. And so narratives, conversations, they are absolutely working. We just had a comment drop in, and we're inviting everyone these last 12 minutes. Please get your questions in. We are still here. And in the last 12 minutes, I'm going to ask, I'm going to actually hit right on that, Daniel. But on these last few minutes, I'm going to ask all the coalition to talk about what they're doing next. And I would love to kind of go first with this marijuana piece, since this is a conversation about cannabis and what is happening next. Daniel from Facebook just put in, hey, when are we going to legalize the retail market? Daniel, I wonder too. I don't know. But, you know, here at this platform, we are really interested to legalize it right. So we're not just going after a certain date. We're going after to be holistically and really intentionally investing into our community, as well as removing the targets off of our backs with the legalization process. This past session, we really started the narrative to understand across the larger board that monopolies, oligopolies, these are things that are going to increase police presence in certain neighborhoods. bad exploitative business is the way that capitalism is racialized here in this United States, right? And across the globe, to be very honest. And in the drug war, we know that these laws were made because of racism. When we know that the drug war is a big reason that we now have quote unquote mass incarceration, right? We have to say when we open up the doors to legal market and the retail market, we really said, hey, it has to look like day one equity. Our partners over at Minorities for Medical Marijuana have also been huge with this for us. Our partners at Minority Business Cannabis Association came in, as well as 39 other orgs, y'all, came in and signed our day one equity letter that said, hey, when we open it up, you open it up with no new crimes, no oligopolies, and you're going to reunite our families. And so this is what my last piece before I'll head over and let the rest of the coalition members speak, is that our movement going forward is really ensuring that we are reuniting families, we are releasing people from cages and resentencing. And so what we are really working on is continuing to build a way for people to get automatically released and resentenced. The bill this past year gave an automatic hearing for those with sole marijuana convictions. If you're in prison for only a marijuana conviction, then you got an automatic hearing. It doesn't mean you're going home, y'all. So when you go in front of that judge could say, no, go on back. And for those that are incarcerated with a marijuana offense, but also for another felony offense that is not marijuana related, for you all to even have a chance, for your loved one to have a chance, they would have to go in front of the parole board, according to the last bill that was moved through the legislature in 2022. There's also barriers to that those felonies could not be violent felonies as well. So slowly but surely, we are building blocks and barriers to people being able to actually get out and be released. And this is part of the playbook and why we say, hey, Daniel, hey, everyone, before you open up that retail market, what's your plan to resentence and release? And those are the questions that we have to have, because when we look across the nation for all of the legal states, not one has completed their resentencing, y'all. And that should tell us what the overall playbook is to legalize it, give early access and limited access to big multi-state operators like medicinal operators, and then make sure that they keep coming after us and that they keep throwing us in the jail and that they make it really, really hard to ever get us out. But that's what we're going to be continuing to work on, is reunite our families and build an option and a proposal that we can say, hey, this is what it means to legalize it, right?
Can I just add a plug here?
Please.
That if you are listening to this and you, your friends, all of y'all are like Daniel, and you're wondering, when will the market be, when will we be able to be like Colorado or whatever state it is, please, I need y'all to be ready at next session to ask these questions when you see the legislation. If the headlines are saying, oh, they're trying to open up the market this year, like they will probably, right, try to do it again, we have to be asking that question en masse. Are they resentencing? What is the plan for getting people free? And those two things have to be interlocked with one another. And if we can do that in Virginia, perhaps we can actually be the first state to free people on day one.
Thank you, Khalia. And there is, if you are following along, we do have a petition that's with the coalition, as well as Minorities for Medical Marijuana. They're a national organization. But if you are following along, you see in the chats, Antoine Hines is actually the Virginia State Director here. Great supporter and really, really supporting us with this Day One Equity Initiative to make sure that we have come with that mass voice, as Khalia said. Valerie, Ashley, Khalia, what else are you all working on? Valerie, I'll let you go first, and then we'll go Ashley and Khalia, you'll close us out.
Cool. Yeah, we are, like I said, we're going to continue working on the moving the Department of Juvenile Justice to health. But there were some bills that we attempted to get through that died, and that was establishing a minimum age of 11 years old for JDR court jurisdiction. In Virginia, you know, it's a sad thing that a 6 or 7 or 8-year-old could be hailed before the court on adjudicatable offenses. That's crazy, right? But we do that here. That's something we do. And we could not get the House to agree to establish a minimum age of 11, even though you have to be 11 years old before you can be locked up. We also attempted to interrupt the ability for police to use deceptive tactics during interrogation. That didn't make it either. Again, I guess it just kind of lends itself to this whole lock 'em up mentality that we are still fighting to change here in Virginia. Also, we are wanting to establish a maximum age, right? We want to lift that maximum age. We want to allow for up to 20 years old. If we are not transitioning young folks that get in trouble before the age of 18 over into DOC until they turn 20, then we should allow them to have all of the benefits of JDR court. And so that was another bill that we were unsuccessful. I will say it was really great to be able to stop the rollback of our felony threshold. They attempted to take it back down to $500, which is outrageous. It would have had a huge impact on our young folks. And so we're glad we were able to stop that. And so everything that we are doing right now is framing the public health lens. It's framing it so that folks understand that when you do not appropriately resource and instead you over police, you are going to have families, you're going to have children, you're going to have communities overrun with police. So we invite you to join us as we fight for the true paradigm shift in the language. It's a public health crisis when children are in DJJ's custody, when they are in the court system. We have got to do something about that. So join us in that fight.
Thank you, Valerie. Ashley.
Thank you. So our shift, we've done a lot of work previously on changing the system, the way that the court system works, the way the police interact. Our focus is going forward is really on decarceration and in every way that we can possibly do that. The main push that we had this year was defelonization of simple possession of drugs. This is not a liberal issue. Oklahoma's done it. Ohio's done it. You know, we literally just this week, we had a prosecutor certify to circuit court an empty baggie with residue. They are still prosecuting these as felonies because they can. And this is, again, like Valerie's saying, this is a public health. This should be in the public health arena. And even if it's not an addiction issue, it's not hurting anyone. And yet it's costing billions of dollars to enforce from the police special task force, which again are all racially based. They only go to certain neighborhoods. They only go to certain places that they deem high crime, which are always communities of color, that they then over police, accost the community, arrest people for these very minor offenses that are felonies that cause someone to be a felon for the rest of their life, which then of course impacts their ability to get jobs, their everything in their future, in addition to incarceration, plus probation violations that come on top of that. So that's a big push. Still working on that. We had some Republican support, but it just can't make it out of the committees. But that would be overnight a huge decarceral factor. Another one that has to do with decarceration is ending the use of mandatory minimums. This got so close last year. It got through both chambers and it just fell apart in committee at the last minute. God, I wish we had gotten it passed. But mandatory minimums are one of the number one fuelers of mass incarceration because it takes away any possible discretion on how much a sentence is actually worth, how much that someone deserves to be punished. And it just says, we have mandatory life sentences in Virginia that if you are convicted, there's no choice. This person's going to prison for the rest of their life, regardless of whether or not that's appropriate. And that obviously hugely fuels mass incarceration. And it's also used in a disparate way because, more people of color are serving these sentences. Why? Because through plea agreements, white people get those mandatory minimums taken away. And so when you look at the disparate impact, you look at the carceral impact, that's two of our biggest priorities that we will continue to keep pushing along with Second Look to get people out who have already been sentenced. And then one that ties into what Valerie said, in Virginia, they're allowed to use your juvenile convictions against you, juvenile felonies, for the rest of your life. I have clients all the time who have 10, 20-year-old juvenile convictions that they don't even remember. They don't know what it was. And then they are used against them to enhance penalties. They're used on their guidelines. They're used to call them violent offenders. So that's another piece that we're working on to bar the use of juvenile convictions for those purposes.
Great. Sounds like some real good work over at Justice Forward, Virginia, as always. Khalia, tell us about VSPN.
Yes. So entering into this session, we had the same goals that we're leaving with, which are to reduce the scope of policing in the carceral system, both on campus, where there's campus police, folks are getting arrested and incarcerated, both community members and students, as well as in our communities, because our universities are part of communities. And so we want to reduce the scope of policing in the carceral system as a whole there. And of course, we're the student power network. So we want to increase accessibility, resources, funding, decision-making power for students and workers, faculty on campuses. And we're looking to increase accessibility of housing as well, because we see that and are hearing that more and more from our members as a huge issue that is affecting them. So that's what we're looking forward to in the legislature. Of course, outside of the legislature, because that's one tactic, right? We are heavy going into fellowship season now. So our application will be dropping soon. I mean, like in the next week or so. So if you're listening and you want to be a part of that opportunity, please keep a lookout. I see that y'all dropped our information over there. So give us a follow and we'll follow up with you as well.
Thank you so much. Valerie, did you want to mention one more component that's being worked on right now?
Oh my gosh, yes. Ending the use of solitary confinement for everyone. But how dare you use solitary confinement on children? How dare you? How dare you take a forming mind and then close it up in a space so that all it has is itself? That's cruel and unusual punishment. One last thing is we're also trying to get all young people out of adult facilities, both jails and prisons. So just two other things that we're working on.
That's right. And if you're listening to all of this and you're like, wow, I thought this was a marijuana panel. Well, y'all, what we have learned is that marijuana is the gateway to all of this, right? What Ashley was mentioning about this was the reason for the approach, the reason for the interaction. Well, the outcome is solitary confinement, is years and years in prison, is separation from families, is loss of their student loans, loss of their resources as a student, not able to get into a university, right? I mean, what we have seen from the drug war and marijuana as this gateway is really the gateway to the carceral system. And that's why we know that equitable legalization can really be the gateway to dismantling the system and shrinking their power. I'm really thankful to be in community with this group. I'm really thankful for everyone tuning in, everyone that signed our letter. If anybody is in the area in DC around the end of the month, 420, around the holiday season, on 423, we will be in DC at the National Cannabis Festival. Myself and Evan Smith is part of our team. We're going to be on a couple different panels there, as well as some of my rock star colleagues, comrade, mentors as well that have just poured into me will also be at this Cannabis Fest. So if you're there, hit us up, come look for us, look out for those panels. And if you have not signed that petition that's in the comments, please do that. And if you have not shared it, please do that. Even if you don't have a platform, send it out to 5 or 6 people that you know in Virginia, right? This is really important that we're getting this word out. Any last words from anybody? No. All right. Well, I'm going to end it there. Thank you all so much. And we'll catch you right here next month on Marijuana Monthly. Peace.